Come with me. Two words that changed everything. When wealthy cowboy Vincent Vaughn rode into Dust Hollow to collect a debt, he expected money, not a father shoving his own daughter forward as payment. But the moment James Hartley's hand struck Melissa's face, Vincent made a choice that would shake the Arizona territory to its core. This is a story of debt, dignity, and dangerous love under the scorched western sun. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust rose in lazy spirals beneath Vincent Vaughn's horse as he approached the Hartley shack, the late afternoon sun turning everything the color of old blood. He'd made this ride 100 times before. Collecting debts was part of the business, part of survival in Arizona territory, 1817. But something felt different today. Maybe it was the way the wind carried the smell of decay. Or maybe it was the silence that hung over the property like a funeral shroud. Vincent Vaughn was 34 years old, and he looked every day of it. The kind of tired that settles into a man's bones when he's seen too much, lost too much, and kept going anyway. His face was weathered leather, his eyes the color of storm clouds, and his hands. Those hands had built an empire from nothing, had buried a wife too young, and had raised a daughter alone in a world that didn't make room for softness. He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the packed earth with a finality that seemed to echo across the empty yard. The Hartley place was worse than he remembered. The porch sagged like a drunk's promise. The windows were filmed with years of grime, and somewhere in the back chickens clucked with the kind of desperate hunger that spoke of neglect. "Hartley!" Vincent's voice cut through the stillness. "James Hartley, get out here!" For a long moment, nothing. Just the wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Then the door creaked open and James Hartley stumbled onto the porch. He was a ruin of a man, 42 but looking 60, with a drinker's bloated face and eyes that couldn't quite focus. His shirt was stained with God knows what, and the smell of cheap whiskey rolled off him in waves. "Vaughn," Hartley said, the word thick in his mouth. "Didn't expect you." "It's the 15th, Vincent said flatly. "Payments due. Has been for 3 months now." Hartley's laugh was ugly, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Payment? Right. About that. I didn't ride 6 miles to hear excuses, James. You owe me $800. That was the agreement." "800?" Hartley swayed slightly, catching himself on the porch post. "Hell of a lot of money." "It's the amount you borrowed, with interest, like we agreed." Vincent's patience was already wearing thin. He'd known James Hartley for 15 years, had watched the man slide from struggling farmer to full-blown drunk with a predictability that was almost sad. "I need payment, or I need collateral. Those are your options." Something shifted in Hartley's expression, a cunning that looked wrong on his ruined face. "Collateral, you say? Property, livestock, something I can sell to cover—" "I got something better." Hartley turned toward the door, and Vincent felt a prickle of unease run down his spine. "Melissa, get out here, girl." The silence stretched. Then, from inside the darkness of the shack, came the sound of light footsteps. Vincent Vaughn had seen many things in his life that made him question the goodness of mankind. He'd seen men shot over card games, watched drought kill entire herds, had held his wife as fever took her piece by piece, but nothing prepared him for what walked out onto that porch. She was 18 years old, he'd later learn, but she moved like someone much older, like someone who'd learned early that taking up space was dangerous. Her dress was patched and repatched, faded from brown to something like dust. Her dark hair hung loose past her shoulders, unwashed but still somehow catching the light. And her eyes, Jesus, her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, wide with confusion and something that looked terribly like hope. "Papa?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, girl. Come here." Hartley grabbed her arm, and Vincent saw her flinch. A practiced reaction, muscle memory from too many similar moments. Hartley dragged her to the edge of the porch, presenting her like livestock at auction. "This here's my daughter, Melissa. Pretty little thing, ain't she?" Vincent's jaw tightened. "What are you doing, James?" "Giving you collateral." Hartley's grin was hideous. "She cooks, cleans, does what she's told. Worth more than $800, I'd wager. Hell, she's worth a small fortune to the right man. The world seemed to narrow to that moment, the girl's face going pale, Vincent's hands curling into fists at his sides, and Hartley standing there with the satisfied look of a man who thought he'd just solved all his problems. She's worth what I owe, Hartley continued, oblivious or uncaring of the horror dawning in his daughter's eyes. Take her off my hands, we call it even. Simple as that. Papa, Melissa's voice cracked on the word. Papa, what are you saying? I'm saying your payment, girl. Mr. Vaughn here's been good enough to loan me money. Now I'm paying it back. You should be grateful, going to a rich man like him. Better than staying here. Vincent watched the realization crash over her like a wave. Her honey-colored eyes went wide, then filled with something deeper than fear. Betrayal, maybe. Or the death of whatever small hope she'd been carrying. I'm not... She turned to her father, her voice rising. I'm not for sale. I'm your daughter. I'm a person, not property you can just trade for. The slap came fast. Hartley's hand caught her across the cheek with a crack that echoed across the empty yard, and Melissa stumbled back, catching herself on the porch railing. A red mark was already blooming across her pale skin. You're whatever I say you are, Hartley snarled. You're a burden I've fed and housed for 18 years. Time you started paying your way. Now shut your mouth and be grateful someone wants you. Something cold settled in Vincent's chest. He'd known Hartley was a drunk, known he was unreliable and occasionally mean. But this was something else entirely. This was a father selling his own daughter, and doing it with the casual cruelty of a man who'd stopped seeing her as human years ago. Melissa stood there, one hand pressed to her reddening cheek, and Vincent saw her eyes go distant. It was a look he recognized from the war, from men who'd seen too much death and had to separate themselves from reality just to keep breathing. She was retreating somewhere inside herself, to some small, safe place where fathers didn't hit and daughters weren't sold. So what do you say, Vaughn? Hartley was grinning again, pleased with himself. We got a deal? Vincent looked at the girl, really looked at her. She was thin, too thin, the kind of hunger that spoke of meals skipped so others could eat. Her hands were rough with work, her dress nearly threadbare. But it was her eyes that got him, those honey gold eyes that held so much pain and so little expectation of mercy. He thought of Ella, his 8-year-old daughter waiting back at the ranch. What if someone had treated her this way? What if someday, when Vincent was gone, there was no one to stand between Ella and men like James Hartley? The choice wasn't really a choice at all. No, Vincent said quietly. Hartley blinked. What? No, we don't have a deal. Vincent's voice was harder now, edged with steel. You want to clear your debt, you pay it in cash. I'm not taking your daughter as payment. Confusion flickered across Hartley's face, quickly replaced by anger. Now you wait just a damn minute. I'm done waiting. Vincent took a step forward, and something in his expression made Hartley step back. You owe me money, James. Real money. Not your daughter, not your word, not your excuses. $800, or I start taking what I'm owed. I'll have the sheriff here by tomorrow to auction off this property. You can't do that. I can, and I will. You signed the papers, put this land up as collateral. You want to keep your property, you find a way to pay me. Vincent turned toward his horse, done with this conversation, done with this pathetic excuse for a man. Wait! Vincent paused, one hand on his saddle. What if... Hartley's voice took on a wheedling tone. What if she just comes to work for you, to work off the debt? That's legal, ain't it? Indentured service or whatever they call it? Papa, no. Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. Shut up, girl. Hartley didn't even look at her. Well, Vaughn, she works for you. A couple years, maybe. Long enough to work off what I owe. That's fair, ain't it? Vincent stood very still. His first instinct was to refuse again, to ride away and let the law handle it. But then he made the mistake of looking back at the girl. She was shaking now, subtle tremors running through her thin frame. Her arms were wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her pieces together. And in her eyes was the absolute certainty of someone who knew their fate was being decided and had no power to change it. If Vincent rode away, what happened to her? Hartley would find another way to sell her, another man less scrupulous than Vincent, or she'd stay here, trapped in this decaying shack with a drunk who saw her as property, and she'd waste away year by year until there was nothing left of whoever she might have been. "How old is she?" Vincent asked. 18, just turned last month. "And you're her legal guardian?" "Her father, yes, sir." Hartley stood a little straighter, sensing possibility. Vincent's mind worked through the angles. If he took her as an indentured servant, there would be papers, a legal contract. It would be above board, nothing like the slave trade that still haunted the South. She'd have rights, at least on paper. And more importantly, she'd be away from here, away from Hartley. He could protect her, not because she was payment, but because it was the right thing to do. 5 years, Vincent said finally. Legal papers drawn up, signed by both of you and witnessed. She works at my ranch for 5 years. That clears your debt. After 5 years, she's free to go wherever she wants. 5 years? Hartley frowned. That seems 5 years or nothing. Those are your options. Hartley's face worked through several expressions before settling on grudging acceptance. Fine. 5 years. And she gets room and board, proper meals, and fair treatment. Any complaints she makes, I investigate. You understand me? Yeah, fine. Jesus, Vaughn, you'd think I was selling her to the devil himself. Vincent didn't respond to that. Instead, he finally turned to the girl who'd been silent through this entire negotiation about her future. Melissa. She flinched at her name as if she'd forgotten she was still there. Do you understand what we're discussing? She nodded slowly, not meeting his eyes. Look at me. Vincent's voice softened slightly. Please. After a long moment, she raised her gaze to his. Up close, he could see the individual gold flecks in her eyes, the way fear and resignation warred in their depths. I need to know you understand, Vincent said. You'd come work at my ranch for 5 years. You'd have your own room, 3 meals a day, and fair treatment. After 5 years, the debt is cleared and you're free to go. But I need to know you agree to this. I won't force you. Melissa's laugh was bitter, a sound too old for her years. Do I have a choice? Yes, Vincent said firmly. You always have a choice. Then what are my other options? She gestured around the desolate yard. Stay here with him? Wait for him to sell me to someone else? Or maybe just... She cut herself off, pressing her lips together. Vincent saw it then, the moment she'd been considering running, just vanishing into the wilderness, taking her chances with whatever waited out there. The fact that she'd even considered it told him everything he needed to know about how desperate her situation was. Those aren't real choices, she said quietly. They're just different kinds of prison. Working at my ranch isn't prison, isn't it? She met his eyes directly now, and he saw a spark of defiance there, buried but not dead. I don't know you. I don't know what kind of man you are, but I know what kind of man my father is. And I know men don't do nice things for girls like me without expecting something in return. The words hit Vincent harder than they should have. She was right to be suspicious, right to expect the worst. The world had probably taught her that lesson over and over. You're right, he said. You don't know me, but I'm going to make you a promise anyway, and you can decide whether to believe it. If you come to work at my ranch, I will treat you fairly. You'll work hard. I won't lie about that. But you'll be fed, you'll be safe, and no one will hurt you. That includes me. 5 years, then you're free. That's my word. Melissa stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something, lies maybe, or hidden cruelty. Whatever she was looking for, she must not have found it, because some of the tension left her shoulders. Like I have a choice, she said again, but this time it sounded less like bitterness and more like resignation. So we got a deal? Hartley was getting impatient. Vincent ignored him. Melissa, I need to hear you agree, out loud. She took a shaky breath. I agree. 5 years. Then I'm free. Then I'm free, Vincent echoed. That's the deal. Good. That's settled then. Hartley rubbed his hands together. When do you want her? Vincent's jaw tightened at the casual way Hartley spoke about his daughter. Today. Now. She packs whatever belongings she has, we draw up the papers, and she comes with me. Today? Melissa's voice rose. But I need time to... Time for what? Hartley snapped. Ain't like you got friends to say goodbye to. Most of your stuff's rags anyway. Go pack, girl. Quick as you can. Melissa looked between them, her panic visible now. This was happening too fast, her whole life changing in the span of a conversation, but she nodded jerkily and disappeared back into the shack. Vincent turned to Hartley. I need paper and ink. We're writing this out proper. Don't have ink. Got pencil, maybe? Then get it. And get your Bible. You're going to swear on it that this debt is cleared once the 5 years are done. 20 minutes later, Vincent had a crude but legally sound contract scratched out on a piece of torn paper. It outlined the terms. 5 years of service, room and board provided, debt cleared at the end. Both men signed it, and Hartley's neighbor, a weathered woman who'd wandered over at the commotion, witnessed it with a suspicious glare at Hartley. Never seen a father so eager to be rid of his daughter, she muttered, but she signed. Melissa emerged with a cloth bundle that couldn't have held more than 2 or 3 items, everything she owned in the world, tied up in a piece of old sheet. She stood on the porch, looking small and lost, and Vincent felt something twist in his chest. That all you got? Hartley asked. Yes, Papa. Well, get going then. Mr. Vaughn's waiting. Hartley didn't move to hug her, didn't offer any words of comfort or goodbye. He just stood there, looking vaguely irritated that this was taking so long. Melissa descended the porch steps slowly, each one seeming to take effort. When she reached the bottom, she turned back one last time. Papa, go on, girl. You ain't my problem no more. The words landed like physical blows. Vincent watched Melissa's face crumple for just a second before she got it under control, smoothing her expression into careful blankness. This, he realized, was a skill she'd learned young. How to hide pain, how to not react, how to make herself small and unnoticeable. Come on, Vincent said quietly. Long ride back to the ranch. He mounted his horse, then held his hand down to her. Melissa stared at it for a moment like she didn't understand what it was for. Then, hesitantly, she reached up and took it. Her hand was small in his, roughened with calluses, but still somehow delicate. Vincent pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, and she settled onto the horse's back with the awkward uncertainty of someone who didn't ride often. Hold on, Vincent said. Grab my waist. Don't want you falling off. After a moment's hesitation, her arms came around him, tentative as bird wings. She was shaking, could feel the tremors running through her, but she held on. Vincent turned his horse and started down the road away from the Hartley shack. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge Hartley standing on the porch. But he felt Melissa turn her head one last time, taking a final look at the only home she'd ever known, terrible as it was. They rode in silence for the first mile. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Normally, Vincent found peace in this ride, in the vast emptiness of the Arizona territory. But today he was acutely aware of the girl clinging to his back, her breathing quick and shallow, like a frightened animal. You doing okay back there? He asked. A pause. Then, yes, sir? Name's Vincent. You can call me that. Yes, sir? She caught herself. Vincent. Another mile passed. Vincent could feel her exhaustion in the way her grip loosened and tightened, like she was fighting to stay alert. How long since you ate? He asked. I had some bread this morning. Just bread? Silence, which was answer enough. Vincent cursed under his breath. There's jerky in my saddlebag, right side. Take some. I couldn't. That wasn't a suggestion. Take it. He felt her shift behind him, heard the leather of the saddlebag creak. Then silence again, but this time punctuated by the small sounds of eating. She was trying to be quiet about it, he realized, trying not to make noise, not to be a bother. Melissa, he said, when was the last time you had a real meal? I don't remember. Jesus. Vincent made a mental note to have Maria, his cook, prepare something substantial when they got back. The girl probably weighed 90 pounds soaking wet. Things are going to be different at the ranch, he said. 3 meals a day, regular as clockwork. You'll work hard, but you'll be fed. Understood? Yes, sir. They rode on. The landscape slowly shifted from open desert to scrubland, and eventually the fence line of Vincent's property came into view. It It was another hour before they reached the main ranch, but when they crested the final hill, Melissa made a small sound behind him. The Vaughn Ranch spread out below them like a small kingdom. The main house was adobe and wood, sprawling and practical. Surrounding it were the bunkhouse, the stables, the cookhouse, and various other buildings that kept a working cattle ranch running. In the distance, cattle grazed across thousands of acres. As the last light hit the property, it looked almost beautiful, a sign of civilization and order in the wild territory. "This is all yours?" Melissa's voice was barely above a whisper. "This is home," Vincent said. "You're home now, too. For the next 5 years, anyway." He felt her tense behind him at the reminder. 5 years. It must have seemed like a lifetime to her. They rode down to the main compound, and immediately, ranch hands started appearing from various buildings. Word traveled fast on a ranch. Everyone would know within the hour that Vincent had brought a woman back with him. "Boss!" A young man named Tommy jogged over as Vincent dismounted. "Didn't expect you back, Socia." He stopped short when he saw Melissa still sitting on the horse, looking like she might bolt at any moment. "Tommy," Vincent said evenly, "this is Melissa. She's going to be working here now. I want you to spread the word. She's under my protection, and anyone who bothers her answers to me. Clear?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." "Good. Go tell Maria to prepare a meal and get the spare room by the stables ready. Clean sheets, water for washing." As Tommy hurried off, Vincent turned back to Melissa and offered his hand again. "Come on down. Let's get you settled." She slid down from the horse with more grace than he expected, but her legs nearly buckled when she hit the ground. Vincent caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy. Long ride on horseback when you're not used to it." She pulled away from his touch as soon as she was stable, wrapping her arms around herself again. In the fading light, she looked impossibly young and impossibly vulnerable. "Melissa," Vincent said quietly, "I know you're scared. I know you don't trust me. Hell, you'd be a fool to trust me after what just happened. But I meant what I said. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." She looked up at him with those honey gold eyes, and he saw the question there even before she asked it. "What do you want from me?" It was the same question she'd asked earlier, but this time there was less defiance in it, just exhaustion and the terrible certainty that everything came with a price. "I want you to work," Vincent said honestly. "There's always work to be done on a ranch. You'll help in the kitchen, probably, with the cleaning and cooking, maybe in the garden. Nothing you're not already familiar with, I'd wager." "That's all?" Vincent met her gaze steadily. "That's all. I'm not going to touch you, Melissa. I'm not going to ask for anything beyond honest work. And 5 years from now, you'll walk away free and clear with enough money saved to start fresh somewhere else if you want." He saw the disbelief in her eyes, the way she couldn't quite let herself believe that things could be that simple. And he understood. She'd learned not to trust easy promises. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you fed." He led her through the compound, aware of the eyes watching them from doorways and windows. The ranch hands were good men, mostly, but they were still men, and a young woman suddenly appearing was bound to cause talk. Vincent made a mental note to address them all tomorrow, make sure everyone understood the situation. The main house was warm and welcoming, lit by oil lamps that cast golden pools of light. Vincent led Melissa through to the kitchen, where Maria was already bustling around pulling out leftovers from dinner. Maria was 60 if she was a day, round and fierce with a heart bigger than Texas. She took one look at Melissa, and her face softened in that particular way women have when they recognize another woman's suffering. "Ay, pobrecita," Maria murmured. "So thin. Come, sit, sit." Melissa looked to Vincent, as if asking permission. He nodded toward the table. "Sit, eat. I'll be back." He left her there in Maria's capable hands and went to check on the room Tommy was preparing. It wasn't much. A small space attached to the stables, meant originally for a stable hand. But it was clean, private, and it had a real bed with a real mattress. Better than anything she'd had at her father's place, he'd wager. Tommy was just finishing up, smoothing a quilt over the bed. "Got fresh water in the basin, sir, and I put some lavender sachets in the drawers, like my ma used to do. Figured it might help with the horse smell." "Good man. Thanks, Tommy." "Sir, if you don't mind me asking," Tommy hesitated. Who is she? I mean, where'd she come from? She's working off her father's debt, Vincent said shortly. And that's all anyone needs to know. Make sure the men understand. She's not entertainment, she's not available, and she's under my protection. Anyone has questions, they can ask me directly. Yes, sir. I'll make sure everyone knows. Vincent returned to the kitchen to find Melissa eating with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd gone hungry often enough that food became purely functional. Maria was watching her with a mix of concern and approval. She's already finished 2 plates, Maria said in Spanish. When's the last time this girl ate proper? I don't know, Vincent replied in the same language. But she's going to eat proper from now on. Melissa looked up at them, understanding they were talking about her even if she didn't understand the words. Her cheeks colored slightly. Sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to be rude eating so fast. Nonsense, Maria said firmly in English. You eat as much as you want, mija. You're too skinny. We need to put meat on these bones. When Melissa finally pushed back from the table, looking slightly dazed from actual fullness, Vincent stood. Come on, I'll show you your room. He led her back out into the evening air, across the yard to the small building by the stables. When he opened the door and lit the lamp, Melissa stopped in the doorway, staring. This is for me? All yours, Vincent confirmed. It's not much, but it's perfect, she breathed. She stepped inside slowly, running her hand over the quilt, touching the clean water basin like she couldn't believe it was real. I've always shared a room with... She stopped herself. There's a lock on the inside of the door, Vincent said quietly. You're the only one with a key. No one comes in without your permission, not even me. She turned to look at him, and for the first time something like gratitude flickered across her face. Thank you, she whispered. Vincent nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow you'll meet Ella, my daughter. She's 8, and Maria will show you around, explain your duties. But tonight, just sleep. You look dead on your feet. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Vincent? He looked back. Why did you do this? Really? Her eyes searched his face. You could have just taken your money from the property. You didn't have to bring me here. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to answer. Finally, he said, Because I have a daughter. And I keep thinking, what if someday when I'm gone, she finds herself in a situation like yours? I'd want to believe that there's someone out there who'd help her, who'd see her as a person instead of property. Maybe by helping you, I'm paying it forward. Maybe I'm just trying to sleep better at night. I don't know. But you deserved better than what he was offering, and I had the means to provide it. That's all. Melissa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You're not what I expected. Neither are you, Vincent said softly. Then he tipped his hat. Good night, Melissa. Lock the door behind me. He left her there and walked back toward the main house, aware that his life had just gotten infinitely more complicated. He'd brought a traumatized young woman onto his ranch, into his daughter's life, and he had no idea if he'd done the right thing or just created a different kind of problem. But when he remembered the look on her face when her father had struck her, when he remembered the resignation in her voice when she'd said, I'm not for sale, he knew he couldn't have done anything else. In the main house, he found Ella awake despite the late hour, sitting on the stairs in her nightgown. Papa! She jumped up and ran to him. Tommy said you brought a lady home. Vincent scooped her up, despite the fact that she was getting too big for it. I did. Her name's Melissa, and she's going to be working here now. Is she nice? I think so. You'll meet her tomorrow. Is she pretty? Vincent thought about honey gold eyes and that spark of defiance that hadn't quite been beaten out of her. Yeah, princess, she's pretty. As pretty as Mama was? The question pierced his heart like it always did. Ella had been only 3 when her mother died of fever. She barely remembered her, but she asked about her constantly. Different kind of pretty, Vincent said carefully. But yes, very pretty. Is she going to be my new mama? No, baby. She's just going to work here and help Maria with things around the house. That's all. Ella seemed disappointed, but she nodded. Okay, Papa. Vincent carried her up to bed and tucked her in, kissing her forehead. Sleep now. Tomorrow's a new day. But as he lay in his own bed later, staring at the ceiling, Vincent couldn't shake the feeling that he'd set something in motion that he didn't fully understand. He'd brought Melissa here to save her, to give her a chance. But he hadn't expected the way her eyes haunted him, or the protective fury he'd felt when her father struck her. He told her he wouldn't touch her, wouldn't ask for more than work. And he'd meant it. But as sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was of honey gold eyes and a voice that whispered, "I'm not for sale." And he wondered if maybe, just maybe, saving her might end up saving him too. Morning came too early, announced by a rooster's crow that shattered the fragile peace of Melissa's first real sleep in months. She jolted awake, disoriented, her heart hammering as she tried to remember where she was. The room was unfamiliar, too clean, too quiet, with actual walls instead of the drafty gaps she'd grown used to. Then it all came rushing back, her father's cruelty, the cowboy's storm cloud eyes, the long ride through the desert, and the impossible promise of safety. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the unfamiliar softness of the mattress. Through the small window, she could see the ranch coming to life in the pre-dawn light. Men moved between buildings with purposeful strides, their voices carrying across the yard in low rumbles. Somewhere, a horse whinnied. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drifted through the air, making her stomach clench with sudden hunger despite Maria's generous meal the night before. Melissa dressed quickly in the same patched dress she'd worn yesterday. Her only dress, really, and splashed water on her face from the basin. The water was still clean, cold against her skin, and she took a moment to study her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. The same honey gold eyes stared back at her, but there was something different in them today. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the absence of complete despair. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Melissa?" Maria's voice, warm and motherly. "You awake, mija?" Melissa unlocked the door, her door, with her key, and found Maria standing there with a bundle of fabric in her arms. "Good, good, you're up," Maria said, bustling inside without waiting for invitation. "I brought you some dresses. They were mine when I was younger before I got so round." She patted her ample hips with a laugh. "They might be a little long on you, but we can fix that. Can't have you working in that rag you're wearing." Melissa looked down at her dress, shame heating her cheeks. "It's all I have." "Well, now you have more." Maria set the bundle on the bed. "3 dresses here, one for working, one for Sundays, and one for in between. And some undergarments, stockings, everything clean and mended. We'll get you more as we need them." "I can't," Melissa started, but Maria cut her off with a wave of her hand. "You can and you will. Mr. Vincent said you're to be properly clothed and cared for. Besides, I got no use for these anymore. They'll just sit in my trunk gathering dust." Before Melissa could protest further, Maria was helping her out of her old dress and into one of the new ones, a simple gray cotton that buttoned up the front. It was clean, whole, and fit her reasonably well, though it hung a bit loose around her too thin frame. "There," Maria said with satisfaction. "Much better. Now come, breakfast is almost ready, and there's someone who's been asking about you since dawn." Melissa followed Maria across the yard to the main house, acutely aware of the eyes that followed her progress. The ranch hands were gathering near the cookhouse, and their conversations died down as she passed. She kept her gaze fixed on Maria's broad back, trying to ignore the whispers that started up behind her. The main house was warm and bright, morning sunlight streaming through the windows. The smell of coffee was stronger here, mixed with bacon, eggs, and fresh bread. Melissa's stomach growled audibly. "Sit, sit," Maria commanded, pointing to the long wooden table that dominated the kitchen. "I'll fix you a plate." Melissa had just settled into a chair when she heard light footsteps on the stairs, followed by a child's excited voice. "Maria, is she here? Is the lady here?" "In the kitchen, pequeña," Maria called back. A moment later, a small whirlwind burst into the room. The girl was 8 years old, with dark curls that clearly hadn't seen a brush yet this morning, and eyes the exact same storm cloud gray as her father's. She wore a white nightgown and bare feet, and she stopped dead when she saw Melissa, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. "You're her," the girl breathed. "You're the lady Papa brought home." Melissa managed a small smile. "I'm Melissa. You must be Ella." "Ella Marie Vaughn," the girl said formally, then dropped all pretense of formality and rushed forward. "Are you going to live here now? Papa said you're going to work here. Do you like horses?" I love horses. I have one named Buttercup, but Papa says she's really his horse and he's just letting me borrow her, but I think that's silly because if I ride her every day, then she's really mine, don't you think? Ella, Maria said with a laugh, give the poor girl a chance to breathe and go get dressed. Your papa will be down soon. Ella deflated slightly, but nodded. Will you still be here when I come back? I'll be here, Melissa said softly. Promise? The word hit harder than it should have. Melissa thought of all the promises broken in her life, all the times she'd been told things would get better, and they never did. But looking at Ella's hopeful face, she couldn't bring herself to add to the world's disappointments. I promise. Ella beamed and ran back upstairs, her feet thundering on the wooden steps. Maria shook her head fondly. That girl, she said, setting a plate in front of Melissa. She's been lonely for female company. The men here, they try their best, but it's not the same. She needs women around. Melissa looked down at the plate. Eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, fried potatoes. More food than she'd normally see in 2 days. Maria, this is too much. Nonsense, you eat. You're too skinny. We need to fatten you up. As Melissa ate, more slowly this time, trying to maintain some dignity, Maria moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. She talked as she worked, a steady stream of information about the ranch, the people who lived here, and what would be expected of Melissa. The men eat breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, Maria explained. We'll be cooking for about 20 men most days, more during roundup season. You'll help me with the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry. There's a garden out back that needs tending, and Ella, that girl needs someone to help her with her lessons and keep her from running wild. Mr. Vincent tries, but he's busy running this place. I don't know much about teaching, Melissa admitted. My father didn't believe in education for girls. Maria snorted. Your father's a fool, but you can read, yes? A little. My mother taught me before she died. Good. That's more than some. We'll figure it out together. Maria paused in her work, turning to look at Melissa seriously. Mr. Vincent, he's a good man, fair, honest. But this ranch, it's his life. He works hard, expects others to work hard too. You do your job, you'll be treated well. You slack off, you'll hear about it. Understood? Yes, ma'am. And the men, Maria continued. Most of them are good boys, but they're still men. You stay away from the bunkhouse unless I'm with you. You don't flirt, you don't lead anyone on, and if anyone bothers you, tell Vincent, Melissa finished, remembering his words from last night. Exactly, Maria nodded approvingly. He meant what he said about you being under his protection. That means something here. The back door opened and Vincent walked in, bringing the smell of horses and morning air with him. He'd clearly been up for hours already. His shirt was dusty, his boots scuffed, but he looked more rested than he had yesterday, less grim. Morning, Maria, he said. Then his eyes found Melissa. Melissa, you sleep okay? Yes, sir. Thank you. Vincent, he corrected gently, we established this yesterday. Vincent, she amended, the name still feeling strange on her tongue. He poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, moving with the ease of someone comfortable in this space. Maria's been explaining things? Yes, Vincent. Good. He leaned against the counter, studying her over the rim of his cup. We'll take today easy, let you get oriented. Maria will show you around, introduce you to people. Tomorrow you can start proper work. I can start today, Melissa said quickly. I don't need special treatment. Something flickered in Vincent's expression. Approval, maybe. Eager to work. That's good. But there's no rush. You're going to be here for 5 years. One day to get settled won't hurt. 5 years. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Melissa looked down at her plate, at the remains of the most generous breakfast she'd ever eaten, and tried not to think about how long 5 years really was. Ella came crashing back into the kitchen, now dressed in a simple blue dress with her hair somewhat tamed. She immediately went to her father, who caught her up in an easy hug. Morning, princess. Papa, can Melissa help me with my lessons today? Please? Vincent looked at Melissa questioningly. You comfortable with that? I'll try, Melissa said. Though I'm not sure I'll be much help. You'll be fine, Vincent said. Ella's studying reading and arithmetic, nothing too complicated. He set his daughter down and ruffled her hair. But after lunch, this morning Melissa needs to learn her way around the ranch. The morning passed in a blur of new faces and information. Maria walked Melissa through the compound, pointing out buildings and explaining their purposes. The cookhouse where the ranch hands ate. The bunkhouse where they slept. The stables, the barn, the equipment sheds. The garden, already showing the green shoots of early vegetables. "This will be your responsibility," Maria said, gesturing to the garden, "along with helping me in the kitchen. It's good work. Peaceful." They passed groups of ranch hands, and Maria introduced Melissa to each one. Most of the men were polite, tipping their hats and murmuring greetings. But Melissa felt their eyes on her, measuring, speculating. She kept her own gaze lowered, trying to make herself small and uninteresting. It was near the stables that they encountered trouble. 3 men were gathered by the water pump, supposedly washing up, but really just talking. As Melissa and Maria approached, their conversation stopped. One of them, a lean man with a mean smile and tobacco-stained teeth, straightened up. "Well, well," he drawled, "this must be the boss's new acquisition." Maria stiffened beside Melissa. "Watch your mouth, Frank." "What?" Frank's smile widened. "Just being friendly. Heard the boss bought himself a girl to warm his bed. Can't blame him. Been lonely since the missus died." The words were like a slap. Melissa felt her face go hot, shame and anger warring in her chest. She wanted to protest, to explain that it wasn't like that, but her throat had closed up. "That's enough," Maria said sharply. "Mr. Vincent brought Melissa here to work, not to listen to your filthy suggestions." Sure. Work." Frank made the word sound obscene. "That what we're calling it now?" One of the other men, younger with kinder eyes, elbowed Frank. "Leave it alone, man." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Frank continued, emboldened. "Pretty girl shows up out of nowhere. Boss brings her back himself, gives her a private room." "Keep talking," a cold voice cut through the air, "and you'll be looking for work elsewhere." They all spun around. Vincent stood about 20 feet away, and he must have approached silently because none of them had heard him coming. His expression was carved from stone, dangerous in its stillness. Frank paled. "Boss, I was just disrespecting a woman under my protection," Vincent said, each word precise and cutting. "Just spreading vicious gossip. Just being the kind of man I don't employ on my ranch." "I didn't mean nothing by it." Vincent crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't raise his voice, but somehow that made him more intimidating. "Let me make something very clear, Frank, and the rest of you listen good." He raised his voice slightly, and Melissa realized other ranch hands had appeared, drawn by the commotion. "Melissa is here to work. She's working off her father's debt. That's the arrangement, and that's all it is. Anyone who suggests otherwise, anyone who bothers her, anyone who makes her feel unsafe, they answer to me, personally. Am I understood?" Chorus of "Yes, boss" came from the gathered men. Vincent's eyes were still locked on Frank. "You got something to say?" "No, boss, I'm sorry, won't happen again." "You're right, it won't. Because you're going to apologize to Melissa, and then you're going to avoid her like the plague unless your work requires interaction. And if I hear one more word, even a whisper, about her from you, you're gone. Clear?" Frank swallowed hard and turned to Melissa. "Sorry, miss, I was out of line." Melissa nodded stiffly, not trusting her voice. Vincent addressed the crowd now. "This goes for everyone. Melissa is off limits. She's not entertainment, she's not gossip material, and she's sure as hell not available. She's a worker on this ranch, same as any of you, and she deserves respect. Anyone got a problem with that?" Silence. The men shuffled their feet, looking anywhere but at Vincent's face. "Good. Now get back to work. All of you." The crowd dispersed quickly, Frank practically running toward the bunkhouse. Within a minute, it was just Vincent, Maria, and Melissa standing by the water pump. Vincent's expression softened slightly as he turned to Melissa. "You okay?" She nodded, still unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She'd expected the gossip, expected the crude assumptions. What she hadn't expected was someone to defend her so fiercely, so publicly. "I meant what I said last night," Vincent continued quietly. "You're safe here. Under my protection. That means something on this ranch." "Thank you," Melissa finally managed. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Vincent's tone left no room for argument. This is your home now for the next 5 years. You shouldn't have to hear that kind of talk. You shouldn't have to feel afraid. Maria patted Melissa's shoulder. Come on, mija, let's finish the tour. And you, she pointed at Vincent, you need to eat. I saved you breakfast. Vincent nodded, his eyes lingering on Melissa for another moment before he headed toward the house. Melissa watched him go, something complicated twisting in her chest. She'd spent 18 years learning that men were dangerous, that kindness always came with a price, but Vincent kept doing things that didn't fit that narrative, and she didn't know what to do with that. The rest of the morning passed without incident. By lunchtime, Melissa had a reasonable understanding of the ranch's layout and routine. She helped Maria serve the midday meal to the ranch hands, keeping her eyes down and speaking to no one. The men were subdued, clearly still thinking about Vincent's words. After lunch, as promised, Melissa sat with Ella at the kitchen table while the girl worked through her lessons. Ella's reading primer was well worn, and she read haltingly but with determination. You're doing really well, Melissa said encouragingly as Ella finished a page. Papa says reading is important, Ella said seriously. He says Mama loved books. Did your mama love books? The question caught Melissa off guard. Yes. Yes, she did. She used to read to me before she died. What happened to her? Fever, same as your mama, I think. Ella's small hand reached across the table and patted Melissa's. It's sad when mamas die. Papa cries sometimes at night. He thinks I don't hear, but I do. Melissa's heart clenched. She looked at this small, wise child and saw a kindred spirit, someone else who'd learned too young that the world could be cruel. Your papa loves you very much, Melissa said softly. I know. Ella smiled. I love him too, and I think I'm going to love you too. The simple declaration nearly broke Melissa. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. Ella, it's okay, Ella said matter-of-factly. You can love more than one person. Maria says the heart gets bigger, not smaller, when you love people. So I'm going to love you, and that's that. Melissa had to look away, overwhelmed. This child, this sweet, open-hearted child, had decided to love her without hesitation, without conditions. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. The afternoon wore on. Vincent came in briefly to check on them, smiling at the sight of Ella and Melissa bent over the primer together. Then he was gone again, back to the endless work of running a ranch. As evening approached, Maria put Melissa to work helping prepare dinner. It felt good to have something to do with her hands, to focus on the simple tasks of chopping vegetables and stirring pots. The rhythm was familiar, comforting in its normalcy. Dinner was served to the ranch hands first, then Vincent and Ella ate at the kitchen table while Maria and Melissa cleaned up. The domesticity of it all was strange to Melissa. At her father's house, meals had been silent, tense affairs. Here, Ella chattered about her day, and Vincent listened with patient attention, asking questions and offering gentle guidance. Can Melissa eat with us tomorrow? Ella asked as she finished her potatoes. Vincent glanced at Melissa, who was scrubbing a pot at the wash basin. That's up to Melissa. She might prefer to eat with Maria. I prefer whatever's appropriate, Melissa said carefully, not wanting to overstep. Then eat with us, Vincent said. Maria usually eats with her husband in their cottage. No reason for you to eat alone. After dinner, Vincent took Ella upstairs for her bedtime routine. Melissa finished cleaning the kitchen, then stepped outside for a breath of air. The desert night was cool and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She could hear the low murmur of men's voices from the bunkhouse, the occasional nicker of a horse from the stables. Beautiful, isn't it? Melissa turned to find Vincent standing a few feet away, having appeared as silently as he had earlier. She was starting to understand why the men called him boss with such respect. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and awareness. Yes, she agreed. I've never seen the stars so clearly. No lanterns to compete with out here. Just nature. He moved to stand beside her, both of them looking up at the sky. You did good today. I know it wasn't easy, especially after what Frank said. You didn't have to defend me like that. Yes, I did. Vincent's voice was firm. Men like Frank, they test boundaries. If I'd let him get away with that talk, it would have just gotten worse. This way, Everyone knows the rules. Melissa was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been nagging at her all day. Why do you care? Really? You barely know me. Vincent was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. 5 years ago, when my wife was dying, she made me promise something. She said, Vincent, don't let the world make you hard. Don't let losing me turn you into one of those men who only sees profit and loss. I didn't really understand what she meant then, but over time, I've come to realize that every choice we make either hardens us or keeps us human. He turned to look at her. When I saw your father try to sell you, I had a choice. I could ride away, let the law handle it, and tell myself it wasn't my problem. That would have been the hard choice. Or I could help you, do something that might actually matter, keep myself human. So that's what I did. And if I disappoint you? Melissa asked quietly. If I'm not worth the trouble? You're already worth it, Vincent said simply. You showed up today, worked hard, treated my daughter with kindness. That's enough. That's more than enough. They stood in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally, Vincent stirred. You should get some rest. Tomorrow the real work starts. Vincent? Melissa called as he turned to go. Thank you for everything. He nodded, his face half-shadowed in the starlight. Good night, Melissa. She watched him walk back to the main house, then made her way to her small room by the stables. Inside, she lit the lamp and sat on the bed, looking around at this space that was somehow, impossibly, hers. For the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, Melissa felt something that might have been hope. It was fragile and uncertain, like a candle flame in the wind. But it was there. She thought about Vincent's words, about choosing to stay human rather than hard. She thought about Ella's easy declaration of love. She thought about Maria's motherly care and the way the ranch hands had scattered at Vincent's anger on her behalf. Maybe, just maybe, this place could be more than a prison sentence. Maybe 5 years here could be a new beginning rather than an ending. As she prepared for bed, Melissa caught sight of herself in the mirror again. The same honey gold eyes looked back at her, but there was something different in them now. Not just the absence of despair, but the faint, flickering presence of possibility. She blew out the lamp and settled into bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The soft shuffling of horses in the nearby stables, the distant call of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the buildings. And for the first time since her mother died 7 years ago, Melissa fell asleep without fear tightening her chest, without wondering what new cruelty tomorrow would bring. Tomorrow would bring work. It would bring challenges. But it would also bring Ella's smile and Maria's kindness and Vincent's steady presence. That, she was beginning to believe, might be enough. The days began to blur together in a rhythm that was entirely foreign to Melissa. The rhythm of purpose, of routine, of being needed rather than merely tolerated. She rose each morning before dawn, helped Maria prepare breakfast for 20 hungry men, tended the garden under the climbing sun, helped Ella with her lessons in the afternoon, and fell into bed each night with the satisfying ache of honest work in her muscles. 3 weeks passed, then 4. The ranch hand stopped staring quite so openly. Frank kept his distance, as ordered, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Melissa began to feel like she belonged somewhere for the first time in her life. But it was the moments with Ella that truly began to change something fundamental inside her. The girl had attached herself to Melissa with the fierce devotion of a child starved for feminine attention. She followed Melissa around the garden, chattering about everything and nothing. She insisted Melissa read to her every night before bed, curling up close like a kitten seeking warmth. And when Melissa braided Ella's wild curls each morning, the girl would sit perfectly still, savoring the gentle touch of caring hands. You're good at this, Ella said one morning as Melissa wove her hair into 2 neat plaits. Better than Papa. He tries, but he always makes them crooked. I used to do my mother's hair, Melissa said softly, before she got too sick. Do you miss her? Every day. Ella twisted around to look at Melissa with solemn eyes. I try to remember my mama, but it's hard. I was so little when she died. Sometimes I'm scared I'll forget her completely. Melissa's hands stilled in Ella's hair. She thought about her own mother, the way she'd smelled like lavender water, the songs she'd hummed while cooking, the feel of her cool hand on Melissa's forehead when fever struck. Those memories were precious, irreplaceable, and the thought of losing them was unbearable. "Then we'll make sure you don't forget," Melissa said firmly. "We'll ask your papa to tell you stories about her. And Maria, I bet she has stories too. We'll keep her alive in the telling." Ella's face brightened. "Really? You'd help me do that?" "Of course." The girl threw her arms around Melissa's waist, squeezing tight. "I'm so glad Papa brought you home." Over Ella's head, Melissa caught sight of Vincent standing in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been there or how much he'd heard, but his expression was unguarded for once, soft with something that looked like gratitude and grief mixed together. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the air between them felt charged with unspoken understanding. Then Vincent cleared his throat. "Ella, finish getting ready. You're helping Tommy with the chickens this morning, remember?" "Yes, Papa." Ella released Melissa and bounded off, all childish energy once more. Vincent stepped into the room, and suddenly it felt smaller. Melissa busied herself tidying the breakfast dishes, acutely aware of his presence. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for what you said to her about her mother. I meant it. She shouldn't have to forget." "No, she shouldn't." Vincent moved closer, and Melissa could smell leather and sage on him, mixed with something uniquely his own. "My wife's name was Catherine. She was kind, patient, smart as a whip. Ella has her smile." "Tell her that," Melissa said, turning to face him. "Tell her all the small things you remember. That's how we keep people alive. In the details." Something flickered across Vincent's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "You're wise beyond your years." "I'm just someone who knows what it's like to lose everything." The words hung between them, heavier than intended. Vincent's eyes searched her face, and Melissa found she couldn't look away. There was an intensity to his gaze that made her pulse quicken, that made her suddenly conscious of how close they were standing. "You haven't lost everything," Vincent said finally, his voice rough. "Not anymore." Before Melissa could respond, Maria's voice called from the kitchen, breaking the moment. Vincent stepped back, the careful distance returning to his expression. "I should get to work," he said. "We're moving cattle to the north pasture today." He left, and Melissa pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of her heart beneath her palm. Something was shifting between them, something dangerous and entirely inappropriate. She was here to work, to pay off a debt, nothing more. But that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Vincent had looked at her in the morning light, or the rough gentleness in his voice when he'd said she hadn't lost everything. The following week brought unexpected trouble in the form of a cold snap that swept through Arizona territory with unusual ferocity. Melissa had been working in the garden, stubbornly trying to finish the weeding before the light failed, when the temperature plummeted and icy rain began to fall. By the time she made it back to her room, she was soaked through and shivering violently. She changed into dry clothes, one of the dresses Maria had given her, and huddled under her blanket, but the chill had settled deep into her bones. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, and her fingers felt like ice. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, someone was knocking urgently on her door. "Melissa?" Maria's voice tight with concern. "Mija, open up!" Melissa tried to stand but found her legs wouldn't cooperate. The room spun dizzyingly. "I can't," she called weakly. "The door's unlocked." Maria burst in, took one look at Melissa's pale face and trembling form, and cursed in Spanish. "Ay, Dios mío, you're burning up. Why didn't you come inside when the rain started?" "I wanted to finish." "Finish nothing. You're sick." Maria felt Melissa's forehead and cursed again. "Wait here. I'm getting Mr. Vincent." "No, I'm fine." But Maria was already gone. Melissa lay back down, pulling the blanket tighter, but she couldn't get warm. The shivers were coming in waves now, violent enough to make her bones ache. She closed her eyes, willing the world to stop spinning. She didn't know how much time passed before she heard boots on the floor and Vincent's voice, sharp with worry. "How long has she been like this?" "I don't know. Could have been all evening." Maria's voice seemed to come from far away. "She's soaked through, Vincent. That rain was nearly freezing." Melissa felt a hand on her forehead, large and warm and unexpectedly gentle. She forced her eyes open to find Vincent crouched beside her bed, his expression grim. "Melissa, can you hear me?" Cold, she managed through chattering teeth. "So cold." Vincent's jaw tightened. He stood abruptly. "Maria, get more blankets, and heat water for tea, something with honey and whiskey. We need to get her warm." "Should I fetch the doctor?" "Not yet. Let's see if we can break the fever first. If she's not better by morning, I'll ride to town myself." Through the fog of fever, Melissa felt more blankets being piled on top of her. Felt someone, Maria, she thought, pressing a warm cup to her lips. The liquid burned going down, but it carried heat with it, spreading through her chest. "That's it," Vincent's voice, close and encouraging. "Drink a little more." But the shivers wouldn't stop. Despite the blankets, despite the hot tea, Melissa's body kept convulsing with cold. She heard Maria and Vincent talking in low, worried tones, caught fragments about shock and exposure and dangerous. Then Ella's small voice, frightened. "Papa, is Melissa going to die like Mama did?" "No, Princess. No, she's going to be fine." But Vincent's voice was tight with an emotion Melissa couldn't quite identify through the fever haze. "I want to stay with her. I'll keep her warm." "Ella, I don't think—" "Please, Papa. Mama used to say body heat was the best medicine, remember? When I was little and got cold, she'd hold me until I warmed up. I can do that for Melissa." There was a long pause. Then Vincent's voice, softer. "All right. But if she gets worse, you come get me immediately. Understand?" "Yes, Papa." Melissa felt the blankets lift, felt a small, warm body curl against her side. Ella's arms came around her middle, and the girl's cheek pressed against Melissa's shoulder. "I've got you," Ella whispered. "You're going to be okay. I won't let you die." The simple, fierce declaration made Melissa want to cry. This child, this sweet child, had lost her mother to fever and was now terrified of losing someone else the same way. But she was staying anyway, offering what comfort she could with her small body and her enormous heart. "I'm okay," Melissa whispered back, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "Just cold. Then I'll make you warm." Gradually, incredibly, Ella's presence began to help. The violent shivers started to ease. The fog in Melissa's mind lifted slightly. She became aware of Vincent sitting in a chair he'd pulled up beside the bed, his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. Maria was there too, moving around the small room with quiet efficiency. "The shivers are stopping," Maria observed. "That's good. The tea is helping, and Ella—" Her voice went soft. "That girl has her mother's healing touch." Vincent looked up, and in the lamplight, Melissa saw the raw fear on his face before he could hide it. He'd been terrified, she realized. Not just concerned, but genuinely terrified that she might die in this small room while under his protection. "Vincent?" Melissa said, her voice hoarse but steadier now. "I'm all right. Just pushed myself too hard." "You scared the hell out of me," he said roughly. "Both of you." He reached over and ruffled Ella's hair gently. "You should be in bed, Princess." "I'm staying," Ella said with the stubborn certainty only an 8-year-old could muster. "Melissa needs me." Vincent looked at Melissa, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. She could feel Ella's warm weight against her, grounding and comforting in equal measure. "All right," Vincent relented. "You can stay, but I'm staying too." "Vincent, you don't have to," Melissa started. "Yes, I do." His tone left no room for argument. He settled back in the chair, crossing his arms. "I'm not leaving until I know you're truly all right. Maria, go get some sleep. I'll watch over them." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come check on you at first light. And Mija," she said, looking at Melissa, "no more working yourself sick, you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." After Maria left, the room fell into quiet. Ella had already drifted off to sleep, her breathing evening out against Melissa's shoulder. The fever was breaking. Melissa could feel sweat beginning to form on her brow, her body finally starting to regulate itself properly. She turned her head to look at Vincent, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read in the dim light. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, careful not to wake Ella. "Stop saying that." Vincent leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs. "You're part of this household now. When someone's sick, we take care of them. It's not complicated. At my father's house, if you got sick, you just had to deal with it, or you died. Either way, it wasn't anyone else's problem. Vincent's expression darkened. Your father was a bastard. Sorry, shouldn't speak ill of family, but it's true. No, you're right. He was. Melissa paused, gathering courage. Why do you do it? Why do you care so much? About me? About your men? About everything here? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. When Catherine died, I thought I'd die too. Thought the grief would just stop my heart, and honestly, I wished it would. But then I'd look at Ella, this tiny girl who just lost her mother, and I knew I had to keep going. Had to keep this place running, keep people employed, keep moving forward. And somewhere in all that forward motion, I realized something. He looked at Melissa directly now, his storm cloud eyes intense. We're all just trying to survive. Everyone on this ranch, everyone in this territory, we're all fighting against the elements, the economy, our own demons. The least we can do is help each other when we can. Show a little kindness. Be the kind of people who make the world a bit less cruel. He paused. Catherine used to say that. She'd say, Vincent, we can't fix everything, but we can fix the small corner of the world we live in. So that's what I try to do. Melissa felt tears prick her eyes. She sounds like she was wonderful. She was. Vincent's voice roughened. And you remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks or manner, but in the way you treat Ella. The way you show up every day and work hard without complaint. The way you're kind even though the world hasn't been kind to you. I'm nothing like her. I'm just... You're stronger than you know, Vincent interrupted. Stronger than you give yourself credit for. And that scares me. Scares you? Why? Vincent stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. He walked to the small window, looking out at the dark night. When he spoke again, his voice was strained. Because when I saw you lying here, shivering and sick, I realized I've started caring about you as more than just a worker on my ranch. I've started looking forward to seeing you at breakfast, to hearing you laugh at something Ella says, to the way you hum while you work in the garden. And I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen. I promised I'd keep things professional, keep my distance. Melissa's heart was pounding now, and it had nothing to do with the lingering fever. Vincent? He turned to face her, and even in the low light she could see the conflict written across his features. You're 18 years old. I'm 34. You're here because you had no choice, because your father sold you to clear a debt. And I'm the man who holds that debt. Nothing about this situation is appropriate or fair. So no matter what I feel, no matter what might be growing between us, I can't act on it. Do you understand? I won't take advantage of you. I won't be that kind of man. The words should have been reassuring. They should have made Melissa feel safe, protected. Instead, she felt something else entirely. A longing so acute it was almost painful. What if I wanted you to? The words were out before she could stop them, shocking them both. Vincent's expression went carefully blank. You don't know what you're saying. You're sick, exhausted. I know exactly what I'm saying. Melissa struggled to sit up slightly, careful not to disturb Ella. You're right that I didn't choose to come here, but I'm choosing to stay now. Every morning I wake up, I could run. I could disappear into the desert and take my chances. But I don't. I stay because this place, this life, it's the first time I've felt like I matter, like I'm more than a burden or a possession. And yes, part of that is because of you. Melissa, stop. No, you said your piece, now let me say mine. She took a shaky breath. I'm not some innocent child who doesn't understand what she feels. I've watched you with Ella, seen how patient and loving you are. I've watched you defend me when you had no obligation to. I've seen you work yourself to exhaustion to keep this ranch running, to keep all these people employed and fed. You're a good man, Vincent Vaughn. Maybe the first truly good man I've ever known. And if that makes me care about you, if that makes me wish things were different between us, then that's not something I'm going to apologize for. Vincent stared at her, his jaw working like he was trying to find words. Finally, he shook his head slowly. You're going to kill me, he said, but there was no anger in it, just a bone-deep weariness and something that might have been longing. You're going to make the next 5 years absolute hell because I'm going to spend every damn day wanting something I can't have. Then maybe we're both in hell, Melissa whispered. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything they couldn't say, everything they couldn't do. Then Vincent moved back to the chair and sat down heavily. Get some rest, he said quietly. We'll pretend this conversation never happened. Will we? We have to. But even as he said it, his eyes told a different story. They traced her face with an intensity that made her breath catch, memorizing details in the lamplight. Melissa settled back down, Ella's warm weight still pressed against her side. She closed her eyes, but she could feel Vincent's presence in the room like a physical thing, protective, powerful, and impossibly distant all at once. She drifted in and out of sleep as the night wore on. Sometimes she'd wake to find Vincent still there, his head tilted back against the chair as he dozed. Once, she woke to find him standing beside the bed, tucking the blanket more securely around her and Ella, his touch so gentle it barely registered. And once, in the deepest part of the night, she woke to find him watching her with an expression of such naked longing that it made her chest ache. Their eyes met in the darkness, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Then Vincent looked away, breaking the connection, and Melissa let her eyes drift closed again. By morning, the fever had broken completely. Melissa woke to find Ella still curled against her, sleeping deeply, and Vincent gone. In his place was a note written in strong, decisive handwriting. Rest today. Maria will check on you. Don't push yourself. V. Maria arrived with breakfast, toast, soft eggs, and weak tea, and shooed Ella off to get dressed for the day. Mr. Vincent stayed all night, Maria said as she fussed over Melissa. Never left your side except to add wood to the stove. I came by at dawn and found him asleep in that chair, looking more exhausted than you. He didn't have to do that. Maria gave her a knowing look. That man doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. If he stayed all night watching over you, it's because he wanted to. Now the question is, why do you think that is? Melissa felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. Maria, I'm not blind, mija. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. And I've seen the way you look at him. Maria sat down on the edge of the bed, her expression serious. Be careful. Mr. Vincent, he's a good man, but he's also a man with ghosts. He loved Catherine with everything he had, and when she died, it nearly destroyed him. If he's starting to feel something for you, it's going to terrify him. He'll fight it, push it down, try to pretend it's not happening. I know, Melissa said softly. He already told me as much. Last night, when I was sick, we talked. He said... She stopped, not sure how much to share. He said he cares about you but can't act on it, Maria finished gently. Because of the age difference. Because of the circumstances that brought you here. Am I right? Melissa nodded miserably. He's not wrong to be cautious, Maria said, but he's also not seeing the full picture. You're not some helpless child he rescued. You're a strong young woman who's survived things that would have broken other people. And if you have feelings for him, real feelings, then those are valid too. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Nothing, Melissa said firmly. Because he's right. I'm here because of debt, because I had no other choice. Any feelings I have, any feelings he has, they're complicated by that fact. It wouldn't be fair to either of us to act on them. Fair, Maria snorted. Love isn't about fair, mija. Love is about two people choosing each other despite all the reasons they shouldn't. But you're young yet. You have time to figure out what you want, what you're willing to fight for. She stood, patting Melissa's hand. Now rest. That's an order. No work today. Melissa did rest, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept replaying Vincent's words from the night before, the way his voice had roughened when he'd admitted to caring about her, the look in his eyes when he'd said she was going to make the next 5 years hell. She'd come to this ranch expecting servitude, expecting to endure 5 years of labor and then walk away free. She hadn't expected kindness. She hadn't expected Ella's unconditional love or Maria's maternal care. And she certainly hadn't expected Vincent Vaughn, complicated, careful, and possibly good Vincent Vaughn, to look at her like she mattered, like she was someone worth protecting and caring about. But now that she had all those things, the thought of walking away after 5 years felt impossible. This place had become home. These people had become family. And Vincent had become something she didn't have words for yet. Something that lived in the space between gratitude and longing and hope. Ella came to visit her throughout the day, bringing flowers from the garden and stories about the ranch's daily happenings. The girl chattered away, seemingly unaware of the complicated emotions swirling through Melissa's mind. "Papa said you need lots of rest," Ella announced importantly. "So I'm not supposed to tire you out. But I can keep you company, right? Company doesn't tire people out." "Company is perfect," Melissa assured her, pulling the girl close. "Thank you for staying with me last night. You were very brave." "I was scared," Ella admitted. "But Papa says being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you're scared. So I stayed because you needed me, even though I was afraid." Melissa pressed a kiss to the top of Ella's head, her heart swelling with affection for this wise, loving child. "Your papa is very smart." "I know." Ella leaned back to look at Melissa seriously. "Do you think Mama would have liked you?" The question caught Melissa off guard. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so." "I think she would have," Ella said with certainty. "I think she would have liked how you braid my hair and help me with my letters and make Papa smile. He doesn't smile much, you know, but he smiles more since you came." Before Melissa could respond to that observation, Vincent himself appeared in the doorway. He looked tired. Maria was right that he hadn't slept well, but his expression softened when he saw Ella curled up next to Melissa. "Princess, you're supposed to be letting Melissa rest, not talking her ear off." "But, Papa, talking isn't tiring." "Out." Vincent jerked his thumb toward the door, but there was no heat in it. "Go help Maria with dinner. I need to check on our patient." Ella pouted but obeyed, bouncing off the bed and heading for the door. She paused there to look back. "Melissa's going to be okay, right, Papa?" "She's going to be fine," Vincent assured her. "Now scoot." After Ella left, Vincent moved into the room, but he kept his distance, leaning against the doorframe rather than coming closer. The careful space between them felt deliberate, significant. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better, much better. The fever's completely gone." "Good." Vincent crossed his arms, a gesture that seemed more protective than aggressive. "About last night, we don't have to talk about it," Melissa said quickly. "No, we do." Vincent's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I said some things I shouldn't have. Put you in an uncomfortable position. That wasn't fair of me." "You were honest," Melissa countered. "There's nothing unfair about honesty." "Maybe not. But there's something unfair about burdening you with my feelings. You're here because you have no choice. The last thing you need is me complicating things further." Melissa sat up straighter, ignoring the slight dizziness that came with the movement. "Vincent, stop deciding what I need. Stop treating me like I'm too fragile or too young to handle complicated emotions. I told you last night, I know what I feel. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if that scares you, then we can pretend nothing's happening. We can keep our distance and be professional and count down the days until this debt is paid. But don't insult me by acting like my feelings aren't real or valid, just because they're inconvenient." Vincent stared at her for a long moment, something like respect flickering across his face. "You don't back down, do you?" "I've spent my whole life backing down. I'm tired of it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Catherine used to say something similar. She'd tell me, 'Vincent, I didn't marry you to be your shadow. I married you to be your equal.' And she was, in every way that mattered." "I'm not trying to replace her," Melissa said softly. "I know, and that's part of what—" Vincent trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. Finally, he shook his head. "Get some more rest. Maria's making chicken soup for dinner, and Ella will want to bring you some. Try to eat, even if you're not hungry. You need to rebuild your strength." He turned to leave, but Melissa called after him. "Vincent?" He paused, looking back. "Thank you. For staying last night, for caring." His expression was unreadable in the afternoon light. "Any time, Melissa. That's what family does." Family. The word echoed in Melissa's mind long after he'd gone. Was that what they were becoming? Was that what this strange collection of people, Vincent and Ella, Maria, and the ranch hands, was that family? If so, it was the first real family Melissa had known since her mother died. And the thought of it, the possibility of belonging somewhere so completely, was almost too much to hope for. But as she lay back down and let exhaustion pull her towards sleep, Melissa allowed herself to hope anyway. Because hope, she was learning, was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. 2 months had passed since the fever, and the Arizona summer arrived with its merciless heat. The days stretched long and brutal, the sun turning the earth to dust and testing everyone's endurance. But Melissa had grown stronger, both in body and spirit. Her skin had bronzed from hours in the garden, her hands had toughened from work, and something in her eyes had shifted from resigned acceptance to quiet determination. She was gathering vegetables one morning when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Visitors were rare enough that the entire ranch took notice. Melissa straightened from the tomato plants, shading her eyes to watch as a fine black carriage pulled into the yard, far too elegant for the rough territory roads. Vincent emerged from the stables, his expression already hardening into something defensive. Maria appeared from the cookhouse, wiping her hands on her apron. And Ella came running from wherever she'd been playing, curiosity bright on her face. The carriage door opened and a man stepped out, middle-aged, well-dressed in a suit that must have been sweltering in the heat, with the soft hands of someone who'd never worked a day in his life. Behind him, looking substantially worse for wear, was James Hartley. Melissa's blood went cold. She hadn't seen her father since the day Vincent had taken her away, hadn't thought about him except in nightmares. And now here he was, standing in the yard like he had any right to be here. Vincent's posture changed immediately, becoming something dangerous and still. "Hartley, what are you doing on my property?" Now, Vaughn, no need for hostility." Hartley's voice had that wheeling tone Melissa remembered too well. "I've come on business. This here is Mr. Edmund Blackwell, a merchant from Santa Fe. Very successful man, very wealthy. Mr. Blackwell, this is Vincent Vaughn, the rancher I told you about." Blackwell stepped forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mr. Vaughn, a pleasure. I understand you have a young woman working here named Melissa Hartley. I've come to make you an offer." Vincent's eyes were like flint. "Melissa isn't for sale." "Well, technically she is," Hartley interjected with an ugly laugh. "You bought her contract from me, remember? All legal and proper. And now Mr. Blackwell here is willing to buy that contract from you, for a handsome profit, I might add." Melissa felt like she'd been kicked. She stood frozen among the tomato plants, unable to move, unable to breathe. This couldn't be happening. They couldn't just trade her like livestock again. Blackwell's gaze found her across the yard, and his eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Ah, there she is. Yes, she'll do nicely. I'm looking for a wife, you see, Mr. Vaughn. Someone young, biddable, who can manage a household and provide children. Miss Hartley fits the requirements perfectly." "I'm not interested in selling her contract," Vincent said flatly. "Perhaps you haven't heard my offer yet." Blackwell pulled out a leather wallet. "I'm prepared to pay you $2,000 for the contract. That's more than double what she owes you, I believe. Quite a profit for a few months of her labor." $2,000. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to buy new equipment, expand the herd, hire more men. Melissa watched Vincent's face, watched the careful blankness there, and felt her hope begin to crack. Of course he would sell. Why wouldn't he? She was just a debt, just a contract. He'd said as much himself. He'd keep things professional, keep his distance. This was the perfect opportunity to be rid of her and make a substantial profit in the process. "Mr. Blackwell," Vincent said slowly, his voice dangerously calm, "I appreciate you coming all this way, but the answer is no." Blackwell blinked. "Well, no? Perhaps you didn't hear the amount. I heard you just fine. The answer is still no." "But that's absurd," Hartley sputtered. "You'd be making a fortune. And Melissa, she'd be going to a fine household, wearing nice dresses, living in luxury. It's a better life than you're giving her here." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Melissa's contract is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone, not for any amount. That's final." Blackwell's expression cooled. "I see. Perhaps the young lady should have a say in the matter?" He raised his voice, addressing Melissa directly. Miss Hartley, I can offer you a comfortable life. A large house in Santa Fe, servants to help you, fine clothes, and the respectability of marriage. Surely that's preferable to working as a ranch hand in this godforsaken desert. All eyes turned to Melissa. She could feel them. Vincent's careful, Maria's concerned, Ella's confused, her father's calculating. But it was Blackwell's gaze that made her feel most exposed, like he was already imagining her as his possession. She stepped out of the garden, moving into the yard with measured steps. Her heart was pounding, but her voice came out steady and clear. Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your offer, but I'm not interested. Blackwell's eyebrows rose. Not interested? My dear girl, do you understand what I'm offering? I understand perfectly. You're offering me a different kind of servitude. A nicer cage, perhaps, but still a cage. Melissa lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. I've been traded, blamed, and silenced my whole life. But here, she gestured around the ranch. Here, I'm treated with respect. I'm fed well, I'm allowed to speak, and I'm valued for my work. That's worth more than all the fine dresses in Santa Fe. Valued for your work, Blackwell repeated with a condescending smile. How quaint. But let's be practical, Miss Hartley. You're 18 years old, reasonably attractive, and completely dependent on Mr. Vaughn's goodwill. What happens when he tires of you? When he finds someone younger or prettier? At least as my wife, you'd have legal protections, a permanent home. She has a permanent home, Ella's voice rang out, high and fierce. The girl had pushed her way to the front of the gathering crowd. Melissa lives here with us. She's part of our family. Ella, Vincent said quietly, but the girl ignored him. She reads to me and braids my hair and helps me with my lessons, Ella continued, her small hands balled into fists. And she makes Papa smile, which he hardly ever did before she came. So she can't leave. She belongs here. Blackwell looked at the child with thinly veiled annoyance. Little girl, the adults are talking. Don't talk to my daughter that way. Vincent's voice cracked like a whip, and several ranch hands stepped forward instinctively. The message was clear. This was getting close to a line that shouldn't be crossed. Blackwell raised his hands placatingly. My apologies. I meant no disrespect, but surely you can see reason, Mr. Vaughn. $2,000. The answer is no, Vincent repeated. Now I suggest you and Hartley get back in your carriage and leave my property. This is ridiculous, Hartley exploded. You're turning down a fortune because of some misplaced sense of, what, honor? She's my daughter, Vaughn. I have a right. You have no rights. Vincent's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. You gave up any rights when you tried to sell her like livestock. The contract is between you and me, and that contract is not for sale. Now get out before I have my men escort you out. Tommy and several other ranch hands moved forward, their intentions clear. Blackwell looked between them and Vincent, calculating. Finally, he straightened his jacket with an irritated jerk. Very well, but you're making a mistake, Mr. Vaughn. That girl isn't worth the trouble she'll cause you. He turned to Melissa one last time. And you, Miss Hartley, are a fool. You're throwing away security and respectability for what? Manual labor and false promises? For dignity, Melissa said quietly. For the first time in my life, I have dignity. And no amount of money can buy that. Blackwell's expression hardened. You'll regret this. Both of you. He climbed back into the carriage, and after a moment's hesitation, Hartley followed. The driver snapped the reins, and the elegant carriage pulled away, leaving dust and tension in its wake. The yard was silent for a long moment. Then Ella broke free from the crowd and ran to Melissa, throwing her arms around her waist. You stayed, the girl whispered fiercely. I was so scared you'd leave. Melissa dropped to her knees, pulling Ella into a proper embrace. I told you I'd stay. I keep my promises. Over Ella's head, Melissa's eyes met Vincent's. His expression was unreadable, but something in his gaze made her breath catch. Before either of them could speak, Maria was there, ushering them toward the house. Come on, all of you. This calls for coffee and something sweet. And Ella, you need to calm down before you burst something. The crowd dispersed slowly, the men returning to their work with muttered comments about nerve and audacity. But Vincent remained in the yard, watching Melissa as she walked with Maria and Ella toward the house. It wasn't until later, after Ella had been calmed down and sent to do her lessons, after Maria had plied them all with coffee and cookies, after the adrenaline had faded into exhaustion, that Vincent found Melissa alone in the garden. She was kneeling among the pepper plants, methodically pulling weeds, using the familiar motion to steady her shaking hands. She heard his footsteps but didn't look up. "You could have said yes," Vincent said quietly. "To Blackwell's offer. I would have let you out of the contract. Let you go." "I know." Melissa pulled another weed, dropping it in her basket. "Is that what you wanted? For me to go?" "No." The word was immediate and emphatic. "But $2,000, Melissa, that's a life-changing amount of money, and he could offer you things I can't—" "Like what?" Melissa finally looked up at him, shading her eyes against the sun. "A big house? I don't need a big house. Servants? I'd rather do my own work. Fine dresses? I have clothes that fit and keep me decent. What else?" "Respectability," Vincent said. "Marriage. A legitimate place in society." "I don't want his version of respectability." Melissa stood, brushing dirt from her dress. "I've seen what marriage looks like when there's no regard between the people involved. My parents had that kind of marriage, legal and respectable and absolutely miserable. My mother died young, and I think part of her was grateful to escape." Vincent moved closer, his expression troubled. "But you're young. You should have the chance to marry someone you choose, someone who—" "Someone I love?" Melissa interrupted. "Is that what you were going to say?" The air between them suddenly felt charged, dangerous. Vincent's jaw worked like he was trying to find the right words. "Yes," he finally said. "Someone you love. Someone who can give you a real life, not just 5 years of servitude." "And what if I told you I don't see this as servitude anymore?" Melissa took a step toward him, her heart pounding. "What if I told you that for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be?" "Melissa, I chose to stay, Vincent, not because I had no other options. Blackwell was an option, however terrible. I stayed because I wanted to. Because when I think about leaving here, leaving Ella and Maria in the garden, and—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "And what?" Vincent's voice was rough. "Say it." "And you," Melissa whispered. "When I think about leaving you, it feels like dying, like cutting out some essential part of myself." Vincent closed his eyes like he was in pain. "You can't say things like that. You don't understand what you're—" "Stop telling me what I understand." Melissa's voice rose with frustration. "I'm not a child, Vincent. I'm not naive or confused. I know exactly what I feel, and yes, maybe it's complicated. Maybe it's inappropriate or inconvenient or whatever other word you want to use, but it's real." When Vincent opened his eyes, the raw emotion in them nearly knocked Melissa back a step. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been fighting this every single day since you got here? When you smile at Ella, when you hum while you cook, when you look at me like—" He cut himself off, running a hand through his hair in agitation. "I promised myself I wouldn't do this. Promised I'd keep you safe, keep things professional. But then you go and say things like that, and I—" "You what?" Vincent looked at her for a long moment, conflict warring across his features. Then, with something like surrender, he stepped closer. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with devastating gentleness. "I care about you," he said roughly. "More than I should. More than is wise or appropriate. When Blackwell was talking about buying your contract, I wanted to hit him. When he looked at you like you were something he could own, I wanted to—" He stopped, shaking his head. "You've gotten under my skin, Melissa Hartley, and I don't know what to do about it." Melissa leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "Then don't do anything. Just let it be. Let us be whatever we're becoming. It's not that simple. You're here because of a contract. Then tear up the contract." Vincent's hand stilled on her cheek. "What?" "You heard me. Tear up the contract. Let me stay because I want to, not because I owe you anything. Make me a free woman, Vincent. And then, if you still feel something for me, if this is still real without the debt between us, then maybe—" She didn't get to finish the sentence because Vincent's mouth was on hers, fierce and desperate and absolutely certain. Melissa made a small sound of surprise that melted into something else entirely as his arms came around her, pulling her close. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her chest, could taste coffee, and heat and promise on his lips. The kiss lasted only seconds before Vincent pulled back, breathing hard. "I'm sorry. That was... I shouldn't have... Don't you dare apologize." Melissa's hands fisted in his shirt, keeping him close. "Don't you dare tell me that was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Vincent said, resting his forehead against hers. "But it can't happen again. Not until..." He took a deep breath. "You're right about the contract. As long as it exists, as long as there's any question of obligation or coercion, we can't do this. But Melissa, I need you to be sure, really sure, because once I tear up that contract, once you're free to go, I'm going to ask you to stay anyway, and I need to know that's what you really want." "I'm sure," Melissa said without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Vincent pulled back enough to look at her properly, searching her face for doubt or uncertainty. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him because he nodded slowly. "Then tomorrow, we'll go to town. We'll have the contract officially dissolved." And then he stopped, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And then we'll figure out the rest." "Tomorrow," Melissa agreed, her own smile breaking through. They stood there in the garden as the sun climbed higher, both of them aware that everything was about to change. Vincent's hand stayed on her face, his thumb tracing idle patterns across her cheek, like he was memorizing the feel of her. "Melissa!" Ella's voice called from the house. "Melissa, where are you? I finished my arithmetic and I got them all right." Vincent dropped his hand reluctantly, and Melissa stepped back, both of them acutely aware that they couldn't be found like this. Not yet, not until everything was settled properly. "Go," Vincent said softly. "She needs you." Melissa nodded but paused before leaving. "Vincent, thank you for turning down Blackwell's offer, for choosing..." She stopped, not sure how to finish. "For choosing you," Vincent finished for her. "Always, Melissa. I'll always choose you." The words wrapped around Melissa's heart and settled there as she made her way back to the house. Ella met her at the door, chattering excitedly about her successful arithmetic lesson, and Melissa let herself be pulled into the comfortable rhythm of the afternoon. But beneath the normalcy, beneath the routine of lessons and cooking and chores, a current of anticipation ran through her. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would be free, and the day after that she could choose this life. Choose Vincent and Ella and the ranch, without any shadow of obligation hanging over them. That evening, as the ranch settled down for the night, Melissa found herself standing outside again, looking up at the stars that had witnessed so many changes in her life. She thought about the girl she'd been just a few months ago, hungry, hopeless, resigned to a life of misery. And she thought about who she was becoming, stronger, braver, capable of choosing her own path. "Beautiful night," Maria said, appearing beside her with the quiet grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading other people's moods. "It is," Melissa agreed. "I saw Mr. Vincent talking to you earlier, in the garden." Melissa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He was just..." "Mija, I told you before, I'm not blind." Maria's voice was gentle, knowing. "That man looks at you the way he used to look at Catherine, like you're the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one, and you look at him the same way." "Is that wrong?" Melissa asked quietly. "Given how I came here, given everything, is it wrong to feel this way?" Maria was quiet for a moment, considering. "Love is never wrong. The circumstances might be complicated, the timing might be imperfect, but the feeling itself? That's always right." She patted Melissa's shoulder. "Just be careful with each other's hearts. You've both been hurt before. You've both lost people you loved. That kind of pain, it makes people cautious. But it also makes love, when it comes, even more precious." "I'm scared," Melissa admitted, "of how much I care, of what it would feel like to lose this." "That's how you know it's real," Maria said simply. "Real love is always a little bit terrifying, but it's also the most worthwhile thing in the world. You'll see." That night lying in bed, Melissa couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the day's events. Blackwell's offer, Vincent's defense of her, the kiss in the garden that had changed everything. She touched her lips, still able to feel the ghost of that kiss, still able to taste the promise it held. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow everything changes. She didn't know that across the yard, in the main house, Vincent was lying awake too, staring at the ceiling and thinking about honey gold eyes and a voice that said, "I'm sure," without hesitation. Didn't know that he was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, that he was already composing the words he would say when he asked her to stay, really stay, not as a worker, but as something more. And she didn't know that Ella, supposedly asleep in her room upstairs, had heard everything from the garden earlier. The girl lay in bed with a smile on her face, thinking about how Melissa would make a wonderful mother, how Papa seemed happy again, how their little family was growing in exactly the right way. The moon rose over the ranch, casting silver light across the buildings and the land. In the stables, horses shifted in their sleep. In the bunkhouse, men snored and dreamed of home. And in the small room by the stables, a young woman finally drifted off to sleep with hope in her heart and the memory of a kiss on her lips. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. But tomorrow, when it came, would bring more than just freedom and promises. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning that none of them saw coming, a test of everything Melissa and Vincent had begun to build together. Because James Hartley wasn't done yet, not by a long shot, and men like Edmund Blackwell didn't take rejection well. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the desert sun would rise on a day that would change everything. Dawn came with the smell of smoke. Melissa woke to shouting, to the acrid scent burning her throat, to orange light flickering through her window in a way that sunlight never did. She bolted upright, her heart already racing with animal instinct before her mind caught up. Fire. Somewhere on the ranch, something was burning. She threw on her dress and stumbled outside to chaos. The barn was engulfed in flames, the old wood catching like kindling in the dry desert air. Ranch hands were running with buckets, forming a line from the water pump, but even from here, Melissa could see it was too late. The barn was lost. The only question now was whether they could stop the fire from spreading to the other buildings. "Melissa!" Vincent's voice cut through the pandemonium. He appeared out of the smoke-filled darkness, his face streaked with soot. "Get Ella and Maria. Take them to the far pasture, away from the buildings. Now!" "But I can help. Please." The desperation in his voice stopped her protest cold. "Just keep them safe. That's all I need from you right now." Melissa ran toward the main house, her bare feet pounding against the packed earth. She found Maria already awake, wrapping herself in a shawl, but Ella was still in bed, confused and frightened by the commotion. "What's happening?" The girl's voice was small, scared. "Fire in the barn, Pequeña," Maria said, gathering Ella into her arms. "But we're going to be fine. Melissa's going to take us somewhere safe." They made their way across the yard, giving the burning barn a wide berth. The heat was intense even from 50 feet away, and embers drifted through the air like malevolent fireflies. Melissa kept one arm around Ella and held Maria's hand with the other, pulling them toward the safety of the open pasture. From this distance, they could see the full scope of the effort. Every man on the ranch was working to contain the blaze, their silhouettes dark against the flames. Vincent was everywhere at once, directing the bucket lines, pulling equipment away from the barn's perimeter, checking that no one was overcome by smoke. "Papa!" Ella cried out, trying to pull away from Melissa. "I want Papa!" "He's working, sweetheart. He's keeping everyone safe." Melissa held her tighter. "We have to stay here where we won't be in the way." They watched for what felt like hours as the barn burned itself out. The bucket lines kept the fire from spreading to the stables and equipment sheds, but there was nothing to be done for the barn itself. By the time the sky began to lighten with real dawn, all that remained were smoking ruins and exhausted men. Vincent came to find them as the sun crested the horizon. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single night, his face drawn with exhaustion, his clothes ruined, burns on his hands from moving hot timbers. But he was alive, and when Ella ran to him, he caught her up in his arms despite his obvious pain. "It's over," he said simply. "Fire's out." "What happened?" Melissa asked. "How did it start?" Vincent's expression darkened. "That's what I need to find out. Tommy, get me some water. The rest of you, get some food in you and then try to rest. We'll assess the damage properly once the embers cool." As the men dispersed toward the cookhouse, Vincent set Ella down and turned to Melissa and Maria. "Thank you for getting them to safety. I couldn't have focused on the fire if I was worried about—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. We're fine, Melissa said softly. That's what matters. We're all fine. But even as she said it, something cold settled in her stomach. Fire in the Arizona desert was always a danger, but the timing felt too convenient. Just one day after Blackwell and Hartley had been turned away, just one day before she and Vincent were supposed to go to town and dissolve the contract. Vincent seemed to be thinking the same thing. His jaw tightened as he looked back at the smoldering ruins. Tommy, I need you to check the barn's perimeter. Look for anything unusual, disturbed earth, footprints, anything that doesn't belong. You think someone set this? Tommy asked, his eyes going wide. I think we need to know for certain. An hour later, Tommy returned with grim news. He'd found boot prints near the back of the barn and the remains of an oil lamp that had been deliberately broken. The fire hadn't been an accident. It had been arson. Vincent called a meeting of all the ranch hands in the yard. Melissa stood with Maria and Ella, watching as Vincent addressed his men with quiet fury. Someone burned our barn on purpose, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled group. Someone who wanted to hurt this ranch, hurt our livelihood, send a message. I have my suspicions about who, but suspicions aren't proof. What I need from all of you is vigilance, extra watches at night, eyes open for anything unusual. And if anyone sees James Hartley or Edmund Blackwell anywhere near this property, you come get me immediately. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, boss" echoed across the yard. Good. Now get some rest. We've got a long road ahead of us, rebuilding. As the men dispersed, Vincent caught Melissa's eye. The look he gave her was complicated, part anger, part worry, part something that looked like guilt. Before she could go to him, he'd already turned away, heading toward his office in the main house. Melissa found him there an hour later, sitting at his desk with papers spread before him and his head in his hands. She knocked softly on the doorframe. Vincent? He looked up, and the exhaustion in his eyes made her chest ache. You should be resting. So should you. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Talk to me. What are you thinking? Vincent leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. I'm thinking this is my fault. I'm thinking I should have seen this coming. Hartley's desperate, Blackwell's vindictive, and I... He stopped, running a hand through his soot-streaked hair. I put a target on this ranch by turning them away. Put you in danger because I couldn't just let you go. Stop that. Melissa moved around the desk to stand beside him. This isn't your fault, and I'm not something you should have let go. I'm a person, Vincent, a person who made a choice, who chose to stay. And now that choice might have cost me a barn and could have cost lives. Vincent's voice was rough with emotion. What if the fire had spread to the main house? What if Ella had been hurt? What if you... He couldn't finish the sentence. Melissa did something bold then, something she wouldn't have dared a few months ago. She reached out and took his burned hand in hers, gentle with the injuries but firm in her grip. But we weren't hurt. Everyone's safe. The barn can be rebuilt. With what money? Vincent laughed bitterly. That barn held feed, equipment, supplies. All of it gone. And rebuilding will cost thousands that I don't have right now. Blackwell's offer would have covered it twice over. The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. Is that what you're thinking? That you should have sold my contract after all? No. Vincent stood abruptly, his hand still caught in hers. God, no. That's not what I meant. He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face with that same devastating gentleness he'd shown in the garden. I would burn down every building on this ranch before I'd let anyone take you from here, but I hate that my choice to keep you might have brought this trouble down on everyone. Then we fix it, Melissa said firmly. Together. We rebuild, we watch for more trouble, and we don't let them win. Hartley and Blackwell, they're trying to punish you for standing up to them. But we don't give them that satisfaction. Vincent searched her face, and slowly, something like hope began to replace the guilt in his eyes. How did you get so strong? I learned from you. The words seemed to break something in Vincent. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, his face buried in her hair. Melissa could feel the rapid beat of his heart, could feel the tremor in his arms that spoke of how close he'd come to losing control. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered into her hair. When I woke up and smelled smoke, when I realized the fire was so close to your room, I thought I'd lost you before I'd ever really had you. Melissa held him just as tightly, her hands fisting in his ruined shirt. You didn't lose me. You won't lose me. I'm right here. They stood like that for a long moment, two people holding on to each other in the aftermath of disaster, drawing strength from the connection between them. Finally, Vincent pulled back enough to look at her properly. We still need to go to town today, he said. Fire or no fire, we're dissolving that contract. I want you free, Melissa, completely free. And then, he stopped, seeming to gather courage. And then I want to court you, properly, the way you deserve. Court me? Melissa couldn't help but smile despite everything. That seems rather formal. You deserve formal. You deserve everything I couldn't give you when you were bound by that contract. Vincent's thumb traced her cheekbone. I want to do this right. Take you to dinner in town, bring you flowers, ask permission to hold your hand, all of it. You already kissed me, Melissa pointed out, her smile widening. Seems like we might be doing things out of order. Then I'll just have to work extra hard to make up for my impropriety. Vincent's own smile finally appeared, transforming his exhausted face into something younger, lighter. So what do you say? Will you let me court you, Melissa Hartley? I say yes, 1,000 times yes. The kiss that followed was softer than the one in the garden, less desperate but somehow deeper. It tasted like smoke and promise and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard and grinning like fools. Papa? Ella's voice came from the hallway, accompanied by her light footsteps. Papa, where are you? Vincent and Melissa sprang apart just as Ella appeared in the doorway. The girl looked between them with knowing eyes that seemed far too wise for 8 years old. Were you kissing? She asked bluntly. Vincent cleared his throat, looking caught. Ella. Because it's okay if you were, Ella continued, coming into the room. I think you should kiss Melissa, and then you should marry her, and then she can be my mama for real instead of just pretending. Ella, Melissa said gently, kneeling down to the girl's level. Nobody's pretending anything, and there's no rush for any of that. Your papa and I, You're just falling in love, Ella said matter-of-factly. That's what Maria says. She says you look at each other like Mama and Papa used to look at each other. And she says that's good, because everyone deserves to be loved. Over Ella's head, Melissa's eyes met Vincent's. She saw her own emotions reflected there. Surprise, joy, fear, and something that might have been love, still too new and fragile to name completely. Maria's a wise woman, Vincent said finally, his voice rough with emotion. But Ella, even if we do get married someday, she won't be replacing your mama. Nobody could ever replace Catherine. I know that, Ella said, going to her father and taking his hand. But Mama wouldn't want us to be sad forever. She'd want us to be happy again, and Melissa makes us happy. She looked at Melissa with absolute certainty. You make us happy, so you should stay forever and ever. Melissa felt tears prick her eyes. I'm planning on it, sweetheart. I'm definitely planning on it. 2 hours later, Vincent and Melissa rode into Dust Hollow together. The town was small and dusty, a collection of buildings that seemed to huddle against the harsh desert landscape. But it had a courthouse, and that courthouse had a clerk who could officially dissolve indentured contracts. They dismounted outside the squat adobe building, and Vincent offered Melissa his arm. She took it, feeling the significance of the moment settle over them like a cloak. This was it. The final severing of the obligation that had brought them together. The clerk was a tired-looking man with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually bored expression. He looked up from his ledger as they entered. Help you folks? We need to dissolve an indentured servitude contract, Vincent said, pulling the folded papers from his jacket. I'm Vincent Vaughn. This is Melissa Hartley. The contract was registered here 3 months ago. The clerk took the papers, scanning them with disinterest. Looks in order. Though it's unusual to dissolve this early, usually these run their full term. Miss Hartley has worked diligently and fulfilled her obligations, Vincent said firmly. I'm satisfied to release her from the remainder of the contract. Your loss, I suppose. The clerk pulled out a large stamp and pressed it firmly onto the papers, then wrote something in his ledger. There. Contract dissolved as of today's date. Miss Hartley, you're free to go wherever you please. The words hung in the air between them. Free. After 18 years of being someone's property, first her father's, then technically Vincent's, Melissa was finally completely free. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. They stepped back out into the bright sunlight, and for a moment Melissa just stood there, letting the reality sink in. She was free. She owed nothing to anyone. She could walk away right now if she wanted to, could start fresh somewhere new, could... "Melissa." Vincent's voice was quiet, tentative. "You're free now, completely free. So when I ask you this, I need you to know there's no obligation, no pressure. You can say no, and I'll respect that. Vincent." Melissa turned to face him, cutting off his nervous rambling. "Ask me." He took a breath, seeming to steady himself. Then he took both her hands in his, right there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw. "Stay," he said simply. "Not because of a contract or an obligation, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Because what we're building together, you and me and Ella and the life we're making, it's worth building. You're worth everything, Melissa. And I know it's too soon, and I know we should take things slow, but I also know that I haven't felt this alive, this hopeful, since Catherine died. You brought light back into my life, into Ella's life, so stay. Please." Melissa looked at this man, this good, complicated, careful man who'd defended her when he didn't have to, who'd kissed her in the garden, who'd held her through fear and fever and crisis. This man who was offering her not just a home, but a place to belong, not just shelter, but love. "I'm staying," she said, her voice steady and certain. "Not because you asked, though that helps, but because when I think about my future, every single version of it has you in it. You and Ella and the ranch and the garden and Maria and all of it. That's my home now. You're my home." Vincent's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it was in full view of anyone who cared to look. A public declaration, a statement of intent. When they finally broke apart, several townspeople were staring, but Vincent just laughed and took Melissa's hand. "Come on," he said. "We need to stop by the general store. If I'm courting you properly, I should probably start with flowers. Vincent, you don't need to. I want to." He squeezed her hand. "Let me do this right." They spent the afternoon in town like a proper courting couple. Vincent bought her a bouquet of wildflowers from the general store. Not fancy, but picked with care. They had lunch at the small restaurant, sitting across from each other and talking about everything and nothing. And when they walked down the street, Vincent kept her hand tucked in the crook of his arm like she was something precious. It was perfect. Simple and imperfect and absolutely perfect. But their peace was short-lived. They were preparing to leave, their horses saddled and ready, when Edmund Blackwell appeared from the saloon across the street. He wasn't alone. James Hartley was with him, both of them clearly several drinks into their afternoon. "Well, well," Blackwell called out, his words slightly slurred. "If it isn't the noble rancher and his little charity case. Come to make your arrangement official, have you?" Vincent's expression went hard. "Blackwell, I suggest you move along before you say something you'll regret." "Regret?" Blackwell laughed, ugly and mean. "The only thing I regret is not burning down your whole ranch instead of just the barn." The words dropped into the street like stones. Melissa felt Vincent go rigid beside her, felt the dangerous stillness that came over him like a storm gathering. "So you admit it," Vincent said quietly. "You set the fire." "Prove it." Blackwell stepped off the boardwalk, swaying slightly. "You can't prove anything. But yes, I paid someone to send you a message. You don't turn down Edmund Blackwell. You don't embarrass me in front of my associates." "You could have killed people," Melissa said, her voice shaking with anger. "Ella was sleeping in that house. Everyone on that ranch could have died." "Collateral damage," Blackwell said with a shrug. "Besides, if you'd just done the smart thing and taken my offer, none of this would have happened. This is on you, girl. You and your stubborn cowboy." Vincent moved then, faster than Melissa had ever seen him move. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Blackwell by the collar, slamming him back against the saloon wall. "You listen to me very carefully," Vincent said, his voice deadly calm. "You just confessed to arson in front of witnesses. The sheriff will be very interested in that confession. And if you or Hartley or anyone associated with you comes near my ranch, near Melissa, near anyone I care about again, I will end you. Do you understand? I will take everything you have and I will not lose a moment's sleep over it. You can't threaten me, Blackwell sputtered, but fear had crept into his eyes. That's not a threat. It's a promise. Vincent released him with a disgusted shove. Sheriff Walker! A tall man with a badge appeared from the courthouse, already alerted by the commotion. Problem here, Vincent? Mr. Blackwell here just confessed to arson. Burned down my barn last night. I have witnesses. The sheriff looked at Blackwell with cold professionalism. That true? He can't prove. Blackwell looked around desperately for support. I heard him, Melissa said clearly. He said he paid someone to burn the barn. I heard it too, Sheriff, the general store owner called from his doorway. Heard him plain as day admit to it. Several other townspeople murmured agreement. Blackwell's face went pale as he realized his drunken bragging had just sealed his fate. Edmund Blackwell, the sheriff said formally, you're under arrest for arson. You have the right to— Wait. Hartley, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. Wait, I can explain. Blackwell paid me to show him the ranch, to help him plan it. But I didn't know he was going to actually do it, I swear. So you were an accomplice, the sheriff said flatly. That makes 2 arrests then. As the sheriff led both men away in handcuffs, Hartley caught Melissa's eye. For a moment, she saw something that might have been regret flicker across his face. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Melissa, I'm sorry. For everything, for being a terrible father, for trying to sell you, for— His voice broke. I just wanted to tell you that. Your mother would have been ashamed of me, and she would have been proud of you. Melissa felt tears sting her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. Goodbye, Father. I hope you find peace someday. But I'm done letting you hurt me. Hartley nodded, looking older and more broken than she'd ever seen him. Then the sheriff pulled him away, and that chapter of Melissa's life closed forever. Vincent's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. You okay? I'm free, Melissa said, the truth of it finally sinking in completely. Really, truly free. The contract's gone. They're gone. All of it. I'm free. Yeah, Vincent said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. You are. So what do you want to do with that freedom? Melissa looked up at him, at this man who'd given her safety and respect and love without asking for anything in return. This man who'd fought for her, who'd chosen her, who was offering her a future built on choice rather than obligation. I want to go home, she said simply. I want to go home with you. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing everything that had happened. But it was a comfortable quiet, the kind shared by 2 people who understood each other without needing words. When they crested the hill and the ranch came into view, Melissa felt something settle in her chest. Home. This was home. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was where she chose to be. Ella came running out to meet them the moment they dismounted, Maria following at a more sedate pace. Did you do it? Ella demanded. Is Melissa free? She's free, Vincent confirmed, swinging his daughter up into his arms. Good. Ella wrapped her arms around Vincent's neck, then reached out to grab Melissa's hand, pulling her closer. Because now she can stay forever, and we can be a real family. Ella, Vincent said gently, we talked about this. We can't rush. Actually, Melissa interrupted, her heart full to bursting. I think Ella might be right. Not about rushing into anything, she added quickly, seeing Vincent's expression, but about being a family. We already are one, aren't we? Maybe not in the traditional way, but in all the ways that matter. Maria beamed at them. Finally. Someone in this family has some sense. Come, all of you. I made a special dinner to celebrate. And later we'll talk about how to rebuild that barn, because this ranch is going to need it if we're going to make it through the winter. That night, after dinner and celebrations and a very excited Ella finally being put to bed, Vincent and Melissa stood together on the porch of the main house. The stars were out in full force, diamond bright against the velvet darkness. This morning, I woke up to the barn burning, Vincent said quietly. I thought I might lose everything. The ranch, my livelihood, you. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. And now, tonight, I'm standing here with you, knowing that the people responsible are going to face justice. Knowing that you're here because you want to be, it feels like a gift I don't deserve. You deserve every happiness in the world, Melissa said firmly, and I'm going to spend as long as you'll have me making sure you know that. As long as I'll have you? Vincent's smile was tender. How about forever? Would that be long enough? Forever sounds perfect. Vincent pulled a small object from his pocket, a ring, simple and gold, with a small blue stone set in it. This was Catherine's, he said quietly. She made me promise before she died that if I ever found love again, I'd give this ring to that person. She said love wasn't something to hoard or protect. It was meant to be shared, passed on, grown. He looked at Melissa with eyes full of emotion. I know it's too soon by conventional standards. We've only known each other a few months, but I also know that I love you, Melissa Hartley. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you love my daughter like she's your own. I love waking up knowing you'll be in the kitchen with Maria, love hearing you laugh, love the way you've brought light back into my life. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Ella's mother, my partner in all things? Melissa looked at the ring, then at Vincent's face, seeing nothing but honesty and hope and love reflected there. She thought about the girl she'd been just a few months ago, the one who'd stood on a porch and declared she wasn't for sale. That girl had been right. She wasn't for sale, wasn't something to be traded or owned, but she could be chosen. She could choose. Yes, she said, her voice strong and certain. Yes, Vincent, I'll marry you. The kiss they shared was witnessed only by the stars and the desert wind, but it felt like a promise to the universe itself. When Vincent slipped Catherine's ring onto Melissa's finger, it fit perfectly. Not because she was replacing anyone, but because love, real love, had a way of making space for everyone who deserved it. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Melissa walked down the makeshift aisle in the newly rebuilt barn. Maria had sewn her a dress of cream-colored cotton, simple but beautiful. Ella walked ahead of her, scattering wildflower petals and grinning like her face might split in two. And at the end of the aisle stood Vincent, looking at Melissa like she hung the moon and stars. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the promises beneath them were anything but. They were promising to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives, to build a life based on respect and love rather than obligation, to create a family that grew through choice rather than blood alone. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Vincent kissed her in front of all the ranch hands and half the town, Melissa felt like she was finally, truly home. The celebration lasted well into the night. The new barn, built with the help of every hand on the ranch and several neighboring ranchers, was christened with music and dancing and laughter. Ella refused to leave Melissa's side, calling her mama with such joy that it made everyone's eyes misty. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Vincent pulled Melissa aside. They walked to the top of the hill overlooking the ranch, the same spot where Melissa had first seen the property months ago. You know what I realized today? Vincent said, pulling her into his arms. What's that? That day I rode to your father's place to collect a debt, I thought I was going to lose money. Thought I'd have to deal with a deadbeat and figure out how to recoup my losses. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Instead, I found everything I'd been missing since Catherine died. I found you, found hope again, found reasons to smile. That's not a debt collected. That's the greatest gift I've ever received. I think I'm the one who received the gift, Melissa said, looking up at him. You saved me, Vincent. In every way a person can be saved. No, Vincent said gently. We saved each other. And now we get to spend the rest of our lives being grateful for it. Years later, when Ella was grown and had children of her own, when the ranch had expanded and prospered, when Vincent and Melissa were old and gray but still looked at each other with the same love they'd discovered in that desert garden, they would tell this story to anyone who'd listen. It was a story about debt and dignity, about loss and love, about how sometimes the things we think will destroy us end up saving us instead. It was a story about a girl who refused to be sold, and a man who learned that true wealth wasn't measured in cattle or land, but in the people you chose to love. But most of all, it was a story about choosing, about the moment when someone extends their hand and says, "Come with me," and you have the courage to take it. About the moment when freedom isn't just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice. And every time they told it, Vincent would take Melissa's hand, the one with Catherine's ring still gleaming on her finger, and he'd say the words that started it all. "Come with me." And Melissa, her honey gold eyes still bright with love, would smile and say what she always said: "I already have, and I'd choose you again 1,000 times over." Because that's what love was, not a debt to be paid or a contract to be fulfilled, but a choice made freely every single day to walk hand in hand into whatever came next. And in the Arizona desert under the endless sky, they lived out that choice for the rest of their days, building a life based not on what they owed each other, but on what they freely gave: respect, partnership, laughter, and love that grew stronger with every passing year. The debt that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by something infinitely more valuable: a love story for the ages, born from ashes and built on choice, standing as proof that sometimes the best things in life come not from what we're owed, but from what we choose to give.